1 hour down, 3 to go as we get into some Beam talk, talking Sacramento Kings, and no better way to kick it off than with our guy, friend of the show, as we approach, well, trade season is technically already here, but with teams and players becoming available as we get to this December 15th date. No better person to talk to right here on a beautiful Monday than Keith Smith of Spa Track and the Front Office Show. Keith, thank you so much for joining us. Happy Monday.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start here, Keith. I mentioned this December 15th date, and that's what I've been kind of telling all the viewers and listeners. That's the date where some players will become available. Then again, it happens in January with more players. Last season, funny enough, current King, Dennis Schroeder, was moved on December 15th. When do you think we'll see some movement? Do you think that, well, not necessarily with the Kings, but do you think that we'll have to wait past that date, or could we see some trades made as soon as the clock hits midnight on December 15th?
Yeah, it won't be right away. It rarely is. That's happened a handful of times. We've seen that, like you mentioned, last year. We actually had 2 trades go down right away on the 15th, but that's pretty rare. I always call it the unofficial opening to trade season. And the reason we call it that's when the vast majority of the players who signed over the summer can be traded. The rest will scatter up to January 15th. So I think it'll probably pick up a little. I do think we might see a couple early trades because around the league and the Kings are not in this situation, but some other teams are. Teams are using their two-way guys a lot. Those guys will run out of NBA active games that they're allowed. So then we may see some movement to free up roster spots and room under hard caps. For those guys, we've got the Chris Paul situation kind of hanging out there where I think they'd like to move that as quick as they can if there's going to be a trade. So we may see some smaller deals, but the bigger stuff, it's always late January, early February, as they're fond to say, deadline spur action.
Talking to Keith Smith of Spa Track and the Front Office Show. So let's start with, I guess, the most valuable asset as far as what everybody else has been saying. Keon Ellis, Keith. And Keon can't really get off the bench, and he's playing 6 minutes a game when he does play. I wanted to talk to you about this because we were looking up kind of the details within Keon's deal, because obviously the Kings could extend him in February. He could say no and become an unrestricted free agent. But kind of the pros and cons of a team trading for Keon now, we looked at a team that was reported who the Kings play tonight, the Pacers, but the Pacers aren't going to we don't think they're going to make the playoffs. They don't have Tyrese Halliburton, so their interest in Keon didn't make a ton of sense because you wouldn't be really playing him or getting that value this season. And then you could, I guess, extend him and lock him in, if you will, going into next season. But just some of the pros and cons with the Keon Ellis situation and why he is seen as valuable to other teams right now.
Sure. I think the place you start with one, he's a pretty good player.
Yeah.
Right. In a league where everybody wants 3-and-D wings and guys with decent size on the perimeter, he's got all of that. He's proven to be a fairly decent shooter, really good defensive player. He can do a little bit of ball handling, a little bit of playmaking, more of a second, third type guy on the floor in that situation. Then he's got that good size. He can defend either guard position and just about most, if not all, small forwards as well. So that's the first part. Part two, his contract is very acquirable. He makes just over $2 million this year. So it's like nothing. That's minimal money in the NBA in a trade. So we're in a position for Keon Ellis where if you wanted to acquire him, you'd probably want to do it sooner rather than later, because you wait till the trade deadline, you can't extend him to a contract that's probably enough for him there, because there's these rules where if you trade for a guy and it's not done with an extension happening while it's done, you get limited for 6 months how much you can extend them for and those kind of things. Well, if you trade for him today, that's before free agency opens. So the idea would be try to get him acquired before December 30th. So if you have that 6-month period, it's up before free agency opens. Otherwise, on July 1st, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent, and you really have, you can pay him more, but that only really comes into play when you're talking about like a max guy. Keon's not at that level, so we really run into a place where, well, does it really matter how much more you can pay him? Like if you have his bird rights or not, that's probably not too much of a thing. But yeah, I do think he's a really interesting trade candidate, mostly for what you mentioned, that he just can't get off the bench in Sacramento.
Yeah, talking to Keith Smith of Spot Track. Then on the flip side, Keith, I think a lot of people were confused as to what the return would be. The argument was, well, the return wouldn't be that good unless Keon, a team knows that Keon is going to extend. What would the Kings likely get back if, let's say, a team traded for Keon today?
Yeah, if they traded for him today, the other team, this is where, and I don't get all bent out of shape about this stuff. This is where we got to have some backroom conversations where it is, hey, what are you thinking about extending? You thinking about sticking around? You going to move? Where are we going to go? That would be part of it. Then the other part that you would have to get into, if you're another team, is, all right, what's the value we're going to give up for him? If you feel pretty good that he's going to stick around, or you feel pretty good, hey, we can get an extension done here, and he's not even going to get to free agency, then you're willing to give up a little bit more. If you're the Kings, if the offers aren't very good, there's no reason to rush, right? Just wait, hold, see if they get better, because one thing that does happen is we'll have more injuries, unfortunately, between now and the trade deadline. We're roughly 2 months out from that. And some teams will come up with, boy, you know what we really need? We need a 3-and-D wing that we can plug in to our rotation pretty easily. And that may be where it's, and you know what? A guy who strictly from a ease of transaction, meaning guy doesn't make a ton of money, Keon Ellis fits everywhere. In that situation. So that's where you could have a team say, you know what, let's go back to the Kings, and maybe Sacramento gets a little bit more out of him there if a team gets a little bit desperate. So that's, where it could kind of go. But at that point, again, you've kind of removed chances of extending. So it's all timing, balance, who the other side is in a trade.
Talking to Keith Smith, great stuff on the Keon Ellis front. Let's go to Demar DeRozan. Now, we've heard DeMar's contract be referred to as kind of a pseudo expiring contract. He's only owed $10 million next season, and he gets the rest of it based on whatever team he's on in January. How do you think DeMar is viewed right now, and how could that return look for the Kings, just based on the idea that a team could trade for DeMar but not necessarily owe him that full contract going into next season because it's not guaranteed?
Yeah, that pseudo expiring part does become attractive for teams, because if you're a team that's like, we think he can help, but we're not necessarily sold on that, you could convince yourself, let's make a run. I mean, he makes almost 25 million this year. So that gets to a number where it's like, all right, that's a big number, but not so big that we can't piece it together to make a trade. And then the partial guarantee into the next season's not so large that that's going to scare you off. So I think that again comes down to, are the Kings willing to move him? Are they willing to say, all right, we're going to trade DeMar DeRozan, and then are they going to be reasonable in a trade? You're not returning a monster package for DeMar DeRozan. Maybe you can get a player who makes roughly the same money, needs a change of scenery, and you're going to kind of start over in a position per se like that. That could be the way it goes. Or you're probably going to get, I mean, maybe you could get a very heavily protected first round pick if a team was desperate enough to say, boy, we really need some scoring and on-ball creation ability, then maybe you could get there. But you're probably looking at a return package that is some matching salary, and that's it. And if I'm the Kings, one way you could plus it up is if you're going to start trading DeMar DeRozan, and let's say they really say, you know what, we got a great offer for guys like Lavine or Sabonis or some of the other veteran guys. What you could do then is say, hey, DeMar DeRozan, we'll take on $30 million in a trade. We'll take on some money, but you got to attach a draft pick to it, because now we're kind of kicking off a rebuild. That's how you can plus up your return if they start leaning in that rebuild direction.
Talking to Keith Smith of Spot Track and the Front Office Show. Let's continue to go around the world here, Keith. The Zack Lavine thing, we've spoken about it before, just as far as could he be convinced into opting out and he gets a 3-year deal somewhere else, a 4-year deal somewhere else. We've gone back and forth about it. Seems like his agency, Clutch Agency, would be hard to convince him to not opt into the $49 million. How do you see this thing moving forward for Zack Lavine? Is it just much ado about nothing? Is he just going to opt in and then next season he'll finish with the Kings? And I also was curious when it comes to next season, even though it's a big number at $49 million, how attractive, let's say he's having a good season similar to what he did last season, how much more attractive does he look to teams even at $49 million once he is legitimately an expiring contract?
Yeah, it's a great point because that completely changes the calculation, right? If you're a team that's looking to get off some money and you're like, we've got to get off this longer term money, you may say Zack Lavine at 49, but it's expiring. That's fine. We can live with that. I think it has helped some. He's played pretty well over the last couple weeks.
I think we're trying to get Keith. I'm not sure what happened there. I think we lost Keith. Kyle, you know the drill. We're gonna get Keith on the phone. I'm not gonna go crazy this time. We're gonna get Keith on the phone and finish off that conversation we were having with him about Zack Lavine. But yeah, I mean, great stuff so far from Keith. Just with the Keon Ellis, I think that was a really interesting note. Just based on when teams can trade for Keon and what that would look like, just because of that six-month stretch and how in the world they could match up that timing. So, yeah, Keon and the DeMar piece of it, it's all about these guys and when they get desperate, if they get desperate based on who is there, who's not. It sounds like we have Keith back again. Keith, we got you.
Yeah, you got me on the phone now, but I don't know what happened. Technology, right? It's either our friend or our enemy.
That's right. Let's just keep pushing here, Keith. I think we lost you in the middle of the Zack Lavine conversation, just based on how attractive he would be to teams next season once he is an expiring, just assuming that he opts into that $49 million.
Yeah, an expiring contract completely changes the math because there you're looking at it and saying, all right, hey, if I'm another team, I'm like, I got to get off a little bit of long-term money, maybe a year or two, something like that. Then I'm looking and saying, all right, I can do that because I can take on Zack Lavine at $49 million. It has helped. He's played better over the last couple of weeks. I think that's helping as well. I think there's possibility for this year. Again, it would probably have to be a team that's pretty desperate for some scoring and really needs some backcourt punch and says, you know what, we can live with the $49 million next year because you said it. I don't think it's very likely we see him opt out. I think he knows there's not going to be that much waiting for him. He would have to land in the absolute perfect place where he's going to be there long term to opt out and then kind of take that $49 million and spread that out over the next 3 to 4 years. But I think as it stands right now, it's a pretty safe bet to say he opts in.
Talking to Keith Smith of Spa Track and the Front Office Show. Keith, another one that's been a bit confusing, if you will. The report came out that he's not thrilled with his usage right now. We've seen this guy go from being considered, a lesser Jokic to being out of the top 5 for bigs in the Western Conference. What do you make about Domantas Sabonis and his current value? I don't know that anybody necessarily knows what type of return the Kings would get back for him if they went in that direction. What do you make about Domas and his value?
Yeah, it's a big contract. So again, that makes it a little bit difficult. It's 42 and a half or 42.3 this year, a little over 136 total through the 27-28 season. So, and that's all fully guaranteed. There's no options on that. That's a lot of money. And that's where I think if you're a team that says, you know what, we have, whether you see Sabonis as a 4 or a 5, but we have another big that is an anchor big as far as rim protection, I think all of a sudden that changes a little bit for you where you're like, you know what, this guy is one of the best facilitating bigs. He's a rebounding machine. He can really, score the ball when he's put in the right positions. And the outside shot, he doesn't take a lot, but it's not bad. I think you'd be there. But you're talking about teams that have that fit. There's maybe 4 or 5 in the entire league, and some of those teams are not in a position to take on $42 million, never mind 136 plus. going forward. So that's the challenge with Sabonis. I think this one might be one where Sacramento, if they even want to move him, and that's not even fully clear, because sometimes you talk to him like, no, hey, he's still somebody we want to build around. Now, some of that is that's just what you say, so you're not tanking trade value at all. But yeah, we're in a tough spot a little bit here with Sabonis and where he could be. I think right now the Kings, unless they're willing to sell at a discount or do one of these, you take my bad contracts, I'll take yours kind of thing, maybe then we see something. But other than that, I think we might see him stick just for a little while longer.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, talking to Keith Smith of SpotTrack in the front office show. Last week, Keith, we talked about the idea of the Kings maybe doubling and tripling down. You know, you see teams like the Hornets who have had so many top picks, but they can't figure it out. The Wizards are attempting to do so, the Nets as well. And just the idea that rebuilding is very sexy. Let's just go be the Thunder. Let's just go be the Rockets. But there are a lot of stories. I mean, the Blazers are doing it, and we don't even know if Scoot Henderson is good. He's not even playing this season. So there's no clear-cut way to do this. So we talked about possibly doubling and tripling down. What do you make of the distressed market, the distressed asset market with the Ja Morants and the LaMelo Balls and the Trae Youngs? If the Kings were to, I guess, at this point, quadruple down on this core, you move on from maybe DeMar and somebody else, but you keep Lavine, you keep Domas, and just decide, let's take one more bite at the apple here and see if we can make it work.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is if you're going to go acquire one of those guys you mentioned, like Trae Young or John Morant or LaMelo Ball, you're going to have to give up one of your big contracts to get them. So you're almost kind of, you're taking those guys on, but you're moving off some other money too. So it becomes almost a balancer for you. But there's something to be said for you own, like, basically all your own draft picks. There's one that's tied up in a swap a few years further down the line, but for the most part, they're in pretty good shape. They have an extra pick coming their way. So I think, from the Timberwolves, which by the time we get to 2031, who knows what the Timberwolves will be. So I think the Kings are in pretty good shape there, and I think what you could see them do is, I like to call these are almost like pre-agency moves, where you go out and you get a guy, and it's like, what's this guy going to do for us this year? Because of who we gave up. Is this really going to change things for us? But what it might be is, hey, he's not doing a lot for us this year. This year, we're still probably going to be in the lottery, and we'll have our own pick, and maybe we'll be able to land a franchise-changing guy, because there are a lot of good players in this draft class coming out. But then now we're going to have that guy, the guys we retained, and the guy we traded for. Now we've got kind of the core that we're building up here moving forward, and that becomes where it's like, all right, we kind of took this year a little bit of a gap here. We knew we weren't going to be very good. That could be the kind of thing you see. Like, for example, Trae Young, if it is, hey, we know he's got this knee thing, we can acquire him, especially if we can acquire him on any kind of discount and work something out, then maybe we can feel pretty good about making a move like that and still kind of play for draft position this season. Those are the options that are on the table right now. I would highly recommend, again, hey, let's go do a quick fix here and let's take on a bunch of long-term money. I think we've all seen that before, and we all kind of know how that's turned out.
Keith Smith. Yeah, Keith, that is kind of, I guess you'd call it, we've called it the hybrid rebuild, if you will, where it's more than a retool, but you're not fully blowing it up. And yeah, that I didn't necessarily connect those dots before. You go get a LaMelo, somebody like that, because he is still so young, and you stink this season, you have your own pick, and you see what happens. Maybe you get lucky and you get a top 3 guy who's supposed to be really good. Keegan's only 25 years old, and you kind of rock and roll from there. Domas is, I think, just turned 30, so you decide what to do there. The West is just so tough. Keith, when you were talking, I know we already talked about Keon a little bit, but I remembered you put out a piece after, I believe it was Summer League, and you, in the piece, you had spoke to, people either close to or within the Kings organization, and you asked them about Keegan and Keon, who were both up for extensions. And the Keon piece of this, obviously they took care of Keegan, but the Keon piece of this, I'm paraphrasing here, but in the piece, they said that they really liked Keon. There was nobody else. They didn't have another guard like that on the team, which is funny because they have 15 of them. But for that to end up where it is now. How surprised are you? And when they decided, I think you spoke to them right before they decided to pick up the option. Do you think that they went wrong? And how surprised are you that they went in this direction? And was the writing on the wall? I know they tried to tell us, no, we could still extend them, which they still technically could. But I was just thinking about that. You put out that piece and they said that they really liked Keon. I just don't know where this thing went south.
Yeah, this is just a good example of a disconnect between a front office and a coaching staff. I believe wholeheartedly. I've even talked to people in the front office who are still big believers in Keon Ellis, but for whatever reason, Doug Christie is not there. And this is the hard thing for a front office where they can believe in players, right? They draft guys, they sign guys, they trade for guys because in most cases, there's a lot of belief in that player. Sometimes it's strictly a salary type thing, but in the case of Keon Ellis, the Kings went out and got him because they believed in him in the front office. And the challenge becomes in that situation where it is, all right, hey, we believe in him. We're going to force Doug Christie's hands and tell him, hey, you're going to play this guy. And if you don't play him, where's it going to go? And that generally, to me, does not go well either, right? This is where you kind of need that synergy between a front office and a coaching staff. For whatever his reasons, Doug Christie doesn't want to play Keon Ellis right now. He believes in other guys ahead of him in the rotation, at least for a lot more minutes. And I'm not entirely sure, what those reasons are. To be completely honest, I've not had a conversation with him about that. So I don't want to, even speculate too deep. But the numbers tell us and the playing time tell us he just doesn't believe in him. But I can tell you from conversations with folks in the front office that there is still a belief in him. So this is just a lack of synergy and where it gets really tough if the front office and the coaching staff aren't on the same page. They're never going to be 100% on the same page. But when it's this far, especially on one specific player, someone's going to have to give one way or another.
Talking to Keith Smith, and Keith, that is eye-opening because a lot of people thought it was the opposite, and it was Doug Christie like we said, Doug Christie wanted to play him, but maybe the front office either wanted to keep the asset safe or, just had other guys that they were focused on. He's not a Scott Perry guy. Another player that's not a Scott Perry guy, and they just moved him to Stockton, talking to Keith Smith of Spot Track and the Front Office Show. Devin Carter, Keith, we're talking about a team with, 6 wins now. They just got their 6 wins. A 13th overall pick. I know it's from the previous regime, but for Devin Carter, I get the redundancy maybe with Keon, who also can't play, and the guard logjam. But how about that from Devin Carter? Just DNPs on a team that's not good. One of the youngest guys on the team at 23 years old, and now they move him to Stockton. You think that's another disconnect? I mean, we haven't seen enough to know whether he can play or not. And I know there's a logjam, but just doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
I think in that situation, this is one where there actually may be synergy because this was not this front office's draft pick. Mm-hmm. So this may be this front office saying, hey, all right, coach doesn't believe in him, and he wasn't our pick, and we don't really believe in him either. So we're going to get him down to the G League where at least he can play, and maybe with increased minutes and things, maybe he can kind of come back and rebuild some value. But I do think this one could be one where they are on the same page, and that's sometimes you see that with front offices. It gets frustrating as a fan, right? Because we invested a lottery pick in this guy. Like, he's not going to play. But sometimes one of the best things that a front office can do is come in and say, hey, part of the reason we're here is the other guys didn't do a good job. So we're here to take over. We're here to make changes. We're going to do some stuff. And that's where I think for them, if they come in with a belief of, hey, he can't play or he's not going to play for us and play the way we want, one of the best things you can do is just kind of start to look to move on. But the one question I would have then is, what happened between now and September, October when they picked up that option for next year for Devin Carter? Why, nothing could have changed that much. I don't know that they expect him to come in and be this drastically different player over the last few months between now and when you picked up that option. I mean, that's where you're kind of throwing good money after bad. If they just said, hey, we didn't draft him, we don't think he can play, and it turns out it was a waste of a lottery pick, but we're not going to cry over spilled milk. We're moving forward with the new front office and our guys, that's where you got to kind of make those decisions. But that part of it there, that's where there seems to be at least some disconnect in between even the front office's thinking on things.
Keith Smith, thank you so much. This was incredible, my guy. We really appreciate it whenever you're able to make the time. We have to do it again soon once some of these moves start being made, but we know you're running around and busy, so we really appreciate the time that you took. Keith Smith of Spa Track and the Front Office Show. We will talk to you soon, Keith. Appreciate it. Happy Monday. Have a good week.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Same to you. Happy holidays. Great stuff from Keith Smith. Let's get to a breather, and on the other side, we'll break down everything that he had to say because the end of that spot was a heater. Allen Stiles, Sactown Sports.
This Sponsor the Clock is brought to you by Light